All right, so I'm good on the greens here. So what I've done is, just to kind of recap real quick, I've been testing some green mixes using different yellows and blues just to see what I get. I wanted to try and get something that was really right in the middle of the green, not too blue, not too yellow. I don't have a lot of yellows in my palette, so I'm limited in that respect. I just wanted to kind of use what I have here. So I stuck with the Quinacridone Gold and French Ultramarine, which gives me this kind of array of colors, which I thought was nice, warm, gradually getting cooler the more blue I mixed in, but it gives me a nice light color, nice medium color, and a nice dark color. So that's what I decided to go with. And then for color harmony, because I'm using the ultramarine, French ultramarine in the green, I'm going to use French ultramarine and burnt sienna for pretty much everything else. And so I did a test painting. This is what I came up with. And so the foliage came out a little warmer than I was looking for, but I did put I spritzed a little bit. I dropped some water in to try and get some effects with it. And so I think that helps that yellow pop. But we'll see what we get in this one. And then I just worked basically wet on dry to start. And then while I had the first light layer down, I went back in with the darks while it was wet to keep the softness. And then while that's wet, I literally just went right into the branches to connect all of that using French ultramarine and burnt sienna down into some shadows, connect it with the dirt and the mulch that's in the pot, and then a lot of ultramarine blue and some burnt sienna details, and kind of see some details in the pot there. And same with the shadow. So minimal colors, but it's doing everything I need to do here. And the one thing I thought of when I finished this one was I was really happy with how it turned out, but I just thought the background was really stark. So I jumped ahead last night and painted just a real quick kind of a value one wash of some French ultramarine and some burnt sienna, just using a couple large flat brushes and just doing vertical and horizontal strokes. And then wherever I went through the tree and the pot, I would just use a paper towel and blotted some of it out because I wanted to keep some highlight in there. But I'm going to use a good sized synthetic brush because I want to do some brushing with the belly, I think the side of the brush, to give me some nice texture. I'm using cold press, or this is actually rough paper. And I'm just giving myself a third puddle here because I'm going to end up making this a medium, I think, to give me a little variation between these. And so I'm going to start with a really light mix. And again, I'm holding the brush sideways, and it's loaded, but holding it sideways, I'm going to move quick and kind of skip around a little bit. And I'll do a little test just to kind of see what I'm getting. And I like that. And I'm kind of moving the brush in a way that sort of hints at the way the growth is happening here. It's kind of going to go out this way and back in towards the middle. And I'm just going very rough. I don't know if you can see my sketch here, but I'm just kind of using the lines as a guide. Any little drips I'll just pick up real quick. I want to keep a light spot in there. And I'm trying to keep the brush loaded so that I get paint down, but not so loaded that I get huge puddles, because I do want some dry brush, leaving some holes in here. And then really paying attention to the edge. And what I can do too is once I'm at a point where I have the rough shape that I like, I'm going to change. For the smaller part down here, I'll change to the same brush, but a smaller size. Another synthetic. Just give me more control. And I want to kind of keep this from looking like a triangle. I'm going to push it up a little here, a little down a little here. So just like that, give a little color. So I just went into my middle value green. I'm going to start laying in some separation here. And I know what I'm eyeballing is I have a clump in this area, another clump in this area. This is kind of in the back on the top, and then another clump here. So I'm kind of looking at separating these shapes using the values. So I drop a little mid value. It's kind of, I want to keep some light here, but there's going to be some darks down the bottom. A variation there. And that's working. I can already tell I'm keeping some of the cool that I wanted in the lighter value. And at this point, just to keep it fresh, I'm going to spritz it a little bit. This is a fine mist sprayer. And I'm going to kind of just use my hand to block parts of it because I really want to focus on the edges here. Just give it a little more moisture to work with, a little more time. And I'll just stick with the smaller brush here for the darks, I think. After it sits in the palette for a minute or two, it'll start to separate a little bit. And I can tell I want to warm it a little bit more, a little more burnt sienna. And I want to make sure I have enough moisture in here. I want it a pretty dry mix. So I'm going to take some of that moisture out, some of the moisture out of my brush. And add a little more paint to what I've already got mixed. And that's going to give me a thicker mix. It'll soften out and move less when I put it in here. And we'll do a little test. It's nice. A little dark there. A little something there. And again, I'm just kind of going back and forth from my first painting and the photo that I have on my screen and looking at where the darker values are. I can squint, make them pop a little bit more. And I'm working left to right and kind of top to bottom, just that I'm not working through with my hand and dragging my hand through the wet paint. I want a nice highlight here, so I'm going to bring some darks next to it. Goes down a little bit. Some darks in there. On the bottom. Up on here. And when you're working with a minimal palette or primary colors, I should have mixed a little bit more dark, but it's easy enough to adjust as I go. There's something. And so right now I'm just putting in kind of some larger shadow shapes. And then I'll come back in and just dot a little bit like that there. Just so that they're not all kind of the same size. There, there's. And I'm just kind of adjusting the edge if I need to a little bit. And then just a little bit out on the edge. And that's pretty dry already, so I'm going to spritz it a little bit, just give it a little mist. And now I'm just kind of looking at the balance. And I like what I've got. I'm going to soften that just a touch. And if I need to be precise when I soften something, I'll just grab a soft brush with some clean water. We'll come in and just touch that edge. And I'm going to mix a little more dark without adding more water. Again, just using 3 primaries. Nice dark mix, and I'll come in here and reinforce some of these. And this will also add a little bit more variation to some of these shadows. Adjust this edge a little. I'll just touch that. Let it bleed a little. Soften, soften. Soften some of that. I like this little opening here, kind of between this cluster and this cluster. I'm gonna be nice to put a little branch in there. I have a little branch pop down here. It's a little dry where I put that dot, so I'm going to soften that. And I'm going to, just for a little more texture, I'm going to spritz it with this bottle, which gives me more dots than a fine mist. And I'm going to cover part of it and just spritz a little into this area. It's just kind of dry it a little bit. And we'll just see if we can add some texture in there. If I see a shape I don't like, I can come in and try and just tweak it a little, refine it. Some depth in here. But I'm going to leave it with that. And then for fun, I could tell it's still damp. I've just put some clean water on my brush, and I'm getting, if it's dripping, I want just a little bit of the excess off of it. But I'm just going to drop some water in here and let it move. That was too much. But I'm just going to control the angle of the board here. Let this move around. I got a huge drop of water in there. I may have to come back and reinforce some of that shadow, but we'll see. We'll see what we get. But what this can do is, normally I would tip the board pretty steeply and let the water really run through. It'll pick up some of the darker pigments and give you kind of a feathery effect. You can see some of it, a little granulation happening here and here. But again, I'm just angling the board, moving it around, trying to control some of that extra water. I don't want to blot it because then I'll just lift some paint out, and I don't want to do that. So there it is. Come back in and just try and reinforce some of their shadows. There we go. Let's see. But there, I want to let that move a little. So I think one other thing I'm going to do here, I've got my old toothbrush. I'm going to grab some of this dark mix. I want to control some of the moisture on the toothbrush. But I need to mix up a little more, I think. I know I have time here because it's still plenty wet. But if I there we go. Just give myself a nice dark mix. It's still thick enough to hold some of that shape. I'll get some of the toothbrush and then carefully I'll hit it in spots with a little spatter. And this is just adding more texture, a little more randomness. looks good. I'm not terribly concerned with some of the spray that I'm getting, but I'll try and soften this a little. Nice. And so you can kind of see what I was talking about. When I spritz it and introduce more water, the yellow separates out. And so you'll get some brighter yellow that creeps out from the cooler colors. But it's all variation, which I don't mind at all. Set those aside. I'll clean a little. I'm done with the greens at this point. Clean a little area. I'm going to use the same brush, so I'll clean it out. Any questions at this point?
I have a quick question. When you did the toothbrush, were you aiming for the dark areas or just random?
It's not. Yeah, it's pretty random.
Okay.
I'm getting it very close to the paper so that I'm keeping some control. And I'm just very lightly flicking the last few bristles.
Yeah.
So that I'm not doing the whole brush, but I'm trying to execute some control that way. But it will, kind of flick out and give you dots all over. But the closer you get, you'll get a cluster in certain areas, but it will spread out. So if you want to be, ready with a paper towel to blop up any random dots, that's fine. I'm not too concerned about that.
Devin, what I meant was on your foliage,
Mhm.
when you were doing the toothbrush, were you aiming for the darker areas to supplement the darks?
Oh, I see what you're saying. A little bit, yes, yes. I was trying to avoid the brighter areas
There you go.
and
That
kind of
was my
go,
question.
yeah, kind of right in the middle.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, great
Okay.
question. Yeah, just to kind of bridge that gap and add a little bit more texture between the two. And a lot of it,
Gotcha.
like I said, it's going to end up kind of all over, but yeah, just to try and bridge that gap between the highlights and shadows. Yep. Thank you for asking. It's a good question. So I like what's happening here. I may come in later with some more shadow colors, but I think it's really kind of doing what it wants to do, which is fine. So I've got kind of a large brush, a little burnt sienna, ultramarine blue. I'm going to start out kind of like with a pretty strong neutral, just almost a grayish color. I'll tint it a little bit towards the warm side. But what I want is kind of a mid ground here, and then I'm going to come in with some shadow color while it's wet and let that soften in. And then I can come back in after the fact too and glaze it with some burnt sienna, which is what I did here, just to warm that up a little bit. But to start, I'm going to go with just a kind of a light warm neutral and just kind of give me the shape here and start connecting to the foliage up top. So I know I'll branch there and there. And I'm kind of keeping this, I'm just letting the tip of the brush just kind of dance on the texture of the paper, keeping it kind of sketchy, because that'll give me more of a natural looking branch shape. And I'm connecting right into the wet part up top. I'm just trying to keep them not repetitive, but interesting shapes. And trying to keep and of course I've got almost exactly parallel there, but I'll adjust it. And maybe we'll throw another branch up that way. But this is really, I'm not even looking at my reference or the photo or my other painting. I'm just kind of, I can see hints of my sketch here, but it's really just about kind of connecting some clusters and keeping them like an interesting shape. And I'm going to have these overlap. So that's going to go behind there and connect. And then once I get to this shape here, I want to kind of keep it angled and interesting. It's one of the nice things about these bonsais is the neat kind of twisted shape that they grow in. And then right down into the dirt. There we go. And I want the branch going up that way. There we go. So I've already got a sense of light coming in there because painting at a little angle, the pigment's running down towards the bottom. And what I'll do, this is all kind of the same color. So I'm just going to connect it all. I'll leave a little bit of glint and highlight at the bottom of the tree here, which I can always come in and adjust later if I need to, but I'll tweak the color a little bit, but it's really going to be kind of the same thing. And then we can come in after the fact with, it's too dark. Come in after the fact with some darks and put a little detail in. And I'm just kind of paying attention to this edge. I want it to be interesting and kind of pop up a little there, down there, up a little, down. Same thing here. Kind of want to avoid a perfect ramp shape. And then another important part here is this highlight that I want to keep on the rim. So I'm just making sure to avoid that. And what I'll do is, since that's still wet, I'll try and paint it this way. It's easier to kind of go a long stretch like this in a vertical versus horizontal. Across there. There we go. So that's all we need for that. Now, while this is still damp, I'm going to go in. If I need to, I can spritz a little bit. But I'm going to come in with some a little thicker and darker mix. And we'll put in some shadow along the branches up here. And I'm keeping in mind that the light is kind of coming from like over our shoulder as we're looking at this, almost lighting the front of it up, but a little bit from the right side. And I'm keeping a little gap here so I can show those branches crossing. And then thicker mix. And I know that the branches where they meet the foliage are going to be in the deepest shadow. So I'm starting there and then just working my way down the left side of these branches. And then we'll just let the brush skip a little bit, give it some texture. So like that. And then I'll take with a softer brush that holds more water. I'm going to let some things move here. I'm going to come in with some burnt sienna just by itself. And it's very wet. I'm kind of starting where the sun or the light would be hitting it. Add some warmth in there and just let it mingle. Do a little edge adjustment if I need to. Right there. So Kind of liking the way that's mingling and moving together. And then I have my darks already mixed. I'll come in while this is still a little damp. And I'm just going to add some lines and details, kind of suggesting some, little rocks or mulch or whatever. And I'm going to vary this too. Add a little more burnt sienna, because that's a little on the cool side. I'll add some more warmth. And just I'm dabbing for texture. That's how I'll describe it. And I'm just trying to vary my lines. I think that's good. I want to come back in and just hit it with a little bit of drips and moisture, which will just kind of help it move around a little bit more. So you can kind of see here over time, you can see the granulation that's happened here. But that is what you get when you drop water in after the fact and it moves that pigment. When you have the texture of the paper like that, the darker, the heavier pigments will sink into the depressions in the paper and kind of move around that way. And that's what causes that separation. But I like that detail. I like what's going on here. I like what's going on there. And at the end, what I'll probably do is come back in when I have some really dark darks mixed for my shadows. And I'll come in and add a little bit more punch to the shadow side of this tree and a little bit in the dirt there. How are we doing on time? 10:30, we're looking good. So this was where I really had a lot of fun when I was painting this. I'm going to wet this shape first, just with clean water. I'm not worrying about the shadow at this point. I'm just doing the pot. But I'm going to wet the whole thing and let it set for a minute so that it's not saturated, but it's still wet enough that the paint's going to move when I put it in there. But that's how I'm going to I want to get this kind of effect where I still have my highlight, but it's all soft edged and the colors run together. I think it gives me a little hint of or suggestion of highlight, like a shine on this part. But I still have that blue color coming through. And then what I did with the blue color was I spritzed it with this, which gives me little like dots of texture. And I just thought that gave me that look that I was looking for the surface of that pot. But that's where we are now. Any questions or anything about what we've got going on here? All good. So for this part, like I said, I'm going to wet it ahead of time. Probably use this brush to wet. And the other thing I'll do is clean this paint off my hands. So I'm not getting that anywhere I don't want it. All right. So we're dealing with pretty much all French Ultramarine in here. I'm going to start with a very light wash of it after I get this wet. And there's wettiness ahead of time is going to give me some soft edges that I want. You can kind of see there's a little bit of a lost edge here that I really like, but that kind of thing is what this is going to allow us to achieve. And if I need to, I'll angle it so I can make sure I'm getting everything. And I'm just making sure I have plenty of moisture up at this area, because once I lay this back down, all that will slowly flow downwards. That should be great. So I don't know if you can see, I'm not sure if that's coming through or not, any of that shine, but I've got a little fan on behind me, so it's drying semi quickly. Let's see. I wish on Zoom I could zoom. That's kind of ironic, I guess. But hopefully you guys can see that all right. I don't know if I can get that a little closer. Trying to keep it so you can see my palette as well. Maybe that'll work. Let's see. And so while that's kind of setting in, I'm going to prep my brush. I'll get some paint mixed up, which is basically just, like I said, a light puddle of ultramarine. And I may need to come back and put more water in there. We'll see. But yeah. And for this, really all I need is one puddle, because I can keep adding more French ultramarine to it to richen it up. I can add water to it to thin it out. I can put some ultramarine in it to neutralize it. I've got a little puddle of burnt sienna here, that I can dip into to put some of the warm colors in there. And I'm going to use this brush because it doesn't hold a lot of water, but it's going to hold a lot of paint, because I already have water here. And I just want to reinforce that a little. It's drying a little over here. There we go. All right. So it's clean water, ultramarine. And with this step, I want to let the paper get to a point where I can paint with some wet paint, but still keep my highlight on that rim there. And if need be, afterwards, I can come back and lift a little bit, but best case scenario is if I don't have to lift. And I'm going to test it over here and just see how much it's moving. This light mix is very wet, so this will be all right. And I'm just kind of controlling the moisture here. Take some of that water out. And I'm going to angle this. I'm just kind of angling the board back and forth so I can move this water, make sure I'm keeping that area as wet as I need it. Yeah. I know I can go with richer color down at the bottom. A little richer color here, here. And so it's just a matter of slowly building up the shape here as it's drying. And I'll be using increasingly thicker paint, which will keep giving more and more control, but it's about building up the values, keeping everything soft. I know I want somewhat of a highlight here. and here. So I'm going richer there, there. Mm. So as it's drying, I'm just constantly refining the shape, going in with thicker and thicker paint. And I think what I'm going to do at this point, I'm going to go extremely thick, a little bit, extremely thick paint, a little bit of burnt sienna into that ultramarine blue to darken it. And I'm going to start working on the rim here. And I want to kind of put the shadow edge under here. And I'm just watching how much it's moving, kind of keeping an eye on that. And I think at this point, I can put some thick paint up top and still keep that highlight, but with a soft edge. I'll tilt the board up a little bit, give it a little bit of movement. The other thing I'm going to do, while it's at this state up around this lip, I want to put in a nice thick bit of burnt sienna. And I'll leave a little highlight there. Just very thick paint. And even though there's a highlight there, I want just a littlest bit of color. There we go. That'll work. And actually, while it's wet, I know there's some more warmth down at the bottom here too. So I'm going to go ahead. There's plenty of moisture down there. I've got almost a bead of water sitting in here. So this is going to soften out plenty. And I'm not worried about that because that's going to be in the shadow. So I'll be able to refine that edge. That's already working. All right. So it's still damp and wet. I'm going to keep going in with thicker paint. I'll keep going darker. Just adding more burnt sienna to my ultramarine mix. And in the reference photo, you can see, if you have a copy of it near you, there's kind of some dark streaks that come through this glass or porcelain or whatever it is, but I don't want to hint at those while it's still damp. Actually, I'm going to put in this shadow here. There's a little shadow. Kind of goes that way. Comes down there. And this is just kind of trying to connect these darks here. Dark there. Stronger mix. There we go. Flicking this across to give a little shadow edge there. And this is all still damp, so I can still keep working with it. So shadow down here. Good. Come in. I'll go back to a little bit of a lighter mix, and I'm going to kind of just soften in, connect it with some of these darks. Oops. That's looking good. What I'll do at this point, I'm going to grab some straight French ultramarine. Take most of the water out of my brush. But I'm just going to come in here and just add some pops of bright blue. That shadow or highlight a little. Right on this top here. Put a little more warmth. Just use what I already have mixed up here. There's like feet that kind of pop out down here. I'm just kind of getting a little more warmth there. I think it just needs. I just need to richen this up a little bit. So I'm gonna let that dry off a little bit and set so that I can come back in with some thicker paint and do the shadow work on that. Make any adjustments I need, but I want to go back in with some darks and just adjust these a little bit. So I'm just adding some burnt sienna to my ultramarine blue mix over here. I want this nice thick paint and a nice dark mix. And let's see, I'll start up here with some shadow branch work. Come right down. And just add some texture. Little dots and lines. I'll grab a wet brush or a damp brush. I'll come in and just touch some of those. Some of these shadows. And a little more. And then with that dark mix, I'll come in and just add some little details to the dirt here. And I'm just letting the parts of it, I'm not even touching the paper. I'm just letting the tip of the brush kind of make contact at certain points as I'm moving it. And I want to vary it. So a little darker, bigger dark spots, small dark spots. But as with anything else, grab a damp brush, come in and just soften some edges. Just touch a little here and there, give some variation. And I can come in with some straight burnt sienna, just add some warmth in here. And then again, just soften some of that. That's that. And then I have a little bit of this white popping through. I want to just try and nix some of that, minimize it a little bit. And then while I'm here, there's a shadow edge that kind of comes down the back side of this. I'm going to hint at that too. All right. On time. Got about 5 or 10 minutes left, which is perfect. I'll just put this shadow in. And for that, I'm going to use my large synthetic again. Same mix, just dark, neutral color. I think, yeah, I'm just going to keep it a dark neutral color. I'll go a little bit on the warm side with it, actually, just so that it contrasts a little bit with the cooler tone there. But let's do this and see what we get. And I'm going to come through and start. I guess I'll start out here, work the shadow in, and then come in and connect it underneath here. And then I'll come in after the fact and just adjust the bottom of this. There's a little highlight that goes in. I may darken some of this again, darken the feet a little bit, but we'll see what we get here. There we go. And so for this part, this rough part is where the tree is being, or the shadow of a tree, and then this is the shadow of the pot. So it's on a rough ground, so it's a little bit rough, but I want to make this part soften out a little bit. So I'll do that first. I'm going to paint this in. I'll come back with a wet, damp brush and soften that edge a little bit, and then I'll come back and finish this and connect it all in. But it's really, I want to get right up to the edge here. And I'm just kind of going to give myself a shape to work with. And maybe what I'll do is I'll put a little water up top and let it just run down. It's kind of how you give watercolor the chance to tell you what it wants, is when you just put water in and let it run. And I want to go right under the feet. I've got a very wet mix here. Some of the water's running down, so I want to thicken it up. There we go. And reinforce some of that right under there. And then there's a little piece of the shadow that sticks out there. And then just right under that foot. Right under that foot. There we go. And I'm going to let that move a little bit. I'll let that flow. I'm going to kind of blend that a little more. And I can come in kind of as this is drying off and add a little thicker paint in spots. And I'm going to grab a smaller brush to come in and try and I'll connect some of these shadows into the pot here. So the feet stick down. And I'm just kind of roughing up this bottom edge here just to show that it's sitting on a kind of a rough textured surface. Something like that. I think what I'm going to do is, if you'll bear with me for a couple minutes, I'm going to hit this with a hair dryer real quick, just to dry off the top layer real quick. All right, that should be good. So I'm going to use a soft brush. I want to put a little bit of a kind of a burnt sienna highlight right across the bottom here. And I'm using a soft brush, so it doesn't less tendency to move the paint that's underneath it. I just want to kind of glaze right over top. Oh, right in there. And I'm just coming in with a little dampness on this brush just to soften that. And then I can, using the same brush, I'll just pick up some of this dark, and I just kind of want to richen some of this. And I'm going to go heavy with the blue and just give it a little bit of that punch. And I'll do the same thing down here. And then a quick spritz. I could go back in here and kind of reinforce some of these darks, but what I'll end up doing is just covering over the texture that I have here, which I really like. So I'm not going to do that for that reason, but I'll see once this is all dried off and I've looked at it for a day, I may come back and adjust that, but I don't know if that comes through at all, but you can see the textures that come through when you introduce that water and let it flow through. It takes some of the heavier pigments, sinks it into the texture of the paper and washes some of the lighter pigments away. So you get these nice little tendrils and textures and things, which you can't really paint. It's kind of like watercolor painting itself, but it's a nice texture. I like the sense of light that's hitting this. I like the highlight here. More of a shine on this than I have on this one, but it's still, I think it still reads as the kind of material, that shiny porcelain, I guess it is. So I think with that, I'm going to call it. Any questions or anything? Let me go back. One of the things I'm noticing is the base for the pot got a little lost here. Just with a damp brush, I'll just lift a little highlight out of there. And I'll wet the same brush and then I'll do the same thing here. I just want to soften that a little bit. There we go. There, that's nice. I think that gives me more of the look I'm looking for. If anything, I might, let's see. Let's see, coming in with a little bit of a warm dark and hitting some of these. Just for a little more richness. And little. Oh, I see one other thing I neglected to do here. Really quick. I just want to drop in a little hint of a branch that comes down and then goes up right below there too. A little branch. Just make the branches. There we go. I like that little branch. Anyway, so I think that brings us to the end. We're 11:03. Timing's not too bad. Any questions?
Devin, I was
Yes.
curious, I was curious that at one point you mentioned, I think you were doing the base or under the pot there.
Mhm.
And yeah, and you mentioned, you said, I want to add a little warmth here. And I guess that's something that, always challenges me maybe. Is there any, when do you know to add like a cool versus a warmer one? Is there like a rule of thumb that say like every quadrant in the painting or whatever should have cool and warm, or and it's all that about artistic license, I guess, and what you think or see or feel. But is there anything that would help to make you think in those terms when you're painting, like do I need to add warm and why, that sort of thing?
It is. It's a great question. I'm always thinking about the balance. And a lot of times, kind of like with a composition in a painting, it's nice to have things offset. And if you have if you can picture kind of a steel yard composition where you have a very large object, like a building over here, and then a small object over here, which kind of counterbalances it. You've got contrast in those shapes and the sizes. And with warms and cools, I like to keep that kind of contrast as well. So I'll typically either go with like a warmer, say 65 to 70% warm painting versus the rest of it being cool, or vice versa. I just think if you get too much of like a very even 50% warm, 50% cool, it sort of stagnates a little bit. I like that contrast of having it off, sort of off balance, a little bit skewed one way or the other. And so for me in this, when I was thinking about the warm here, in the reference photo, there's like in this pot, there is some of this burnt sienna color that actually comes through. But the ground that it's sitting on is kind of like a beige, kind of a stone concrete patio. And so there's a little bit of warmth. The light that's reflecting off of that is bouncing up and adding a little bit of warmth underneath here. But for the most part, it was really just about, like in the photo, you can see down at the bottom here, there is some burnt sienna that comes through that's actually in the pot that's not reflected light. But you also, I'm also thinking about the reflected light. So I wanted some warmth in the bottom here. But it is really, this is mostly cool with a little bit of warmth, which gives that warmth visual impact because I think it's punchy enough and there's enough of it that it's noticeable, but it's certainly not 50-50. So I hope that answers the question a little bit. I do like that. I always think about warms and cools and the balance between the two. And I try and keep it, like I said, more weighted towards warm or cool, but definitely I want to have like 2/3 and 1/3 as far as that separation goes.
Yeah, that's good. That's helpful. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, of course. Thanks, Beth. Well, I guess if there aren't any more questions, I can let you all go for today. Thanks so much for joining me. Hope to see you all in the next one.